Hello everyone, welcome to this week's review of the week. If you're new to this, what we do, we take a look back at what's been happening this week, look at the markets, and have a look at next week. We'll talk about the events next week, all that sort of stuff. We'll look at the usual major markets. If someone could confirm that the volume is all okay, that'd be great. If you could put that in the chat just to confirm that's all right. I think I finally cracked some of the microphone problems that we've had on recent live streams, but if you could confirm that, that would be great. So the format for today, the way it works, I'll talk about our usual markets, the major markets. We'll have a look at them on the chart, see where maybe the opportunities are, and then sort of open things up really to have a look at any markets that you want covered. So that's it. We'll run for an hour max, so we'll be done by 3:30. Let's just do the risk warning quickly. It's important to understand this presentation is for educational purposes. It does not contain and should not be construed as containing investment advice or an investment recommendation or an offer of or solicitation for a transaction in any financial instrument. David Jones and Capital.com accept no responsibility for any use that may be made of these comments and for any consequences that result. Spread bets and CFDs are complex instruments and can come with a high risk of losing money rapidly due to leverage. 71.2% of retail investors' accounts lose money when spread betting and or trading CFDs. With this provider, you should consider whether you understand how spread bets and CFDs work and whether you can afford to take the high risk of losing your money. So we will spend most of today's session on our trading platform at Capital.com. I'll just go through some stuff on PowerPoint now, then we'll jump backwards and forwards onto this and actually look at the real markets. Okay, let's go back to that quickly. Our special offer for today, we always do one of these every week, but today, if you're a client of Capital or you open an account today, you can trade the dollar against the Canadian dollar spread-free till I think it's 6 o'clock this evening. So we'll take a look at that while we're going through the markets. I mean, the dollar is different at the moment. It is interesting at the moment anyway. So let's run through some of the important events for next week. Monday, the 12th of April, European retail sales. Be interesting given, of course, the lockdowns that we've been going through in recent months. Tuesday, the 13th of April, UK GDP, month on month. So what's the UK economy look like? How much growth are we seeing? All that sort of stuff. And then US inflation in the afternoon. That could be interesting on Tuesday. Inflation, is becoming perhaps more of a concern for markets at the moment. So I think that could be an interesting one with a bit of volatility maybe over that number. Next Thursday, US retail sales. Again, interesting, of course, given the current state of the world. And Friday, the 15th of April, China GDP. So how well or not is the Chinese economy doing? I think they saw incredible growth in the last quarter of 2020. So that'll be interesting next Friday. So some economic things to look out for. Let's talk about the markets, then we'll jump onto the platform. Stock markets, all-time highs again for the S&P 500 this week and also for the DAX, the German stock market. It's been a boring few days, I think, in the German stock market, but it did move out to fresh all-time highs this week. So we'll take a look at those markets. Gold and silver, a good week, a rare good week recently for both of these, gold and silver. We did do a gold video earlier this week. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed to our channel, if you can subscribe to the channel by clicking subscribe on YouTube, but that you're watching this on now, that'd be great. But we did do a gold video earlier this week. I did put an order in to buy, just missed it, but we saw gold rally. But is it a dead cat bounce in gold? We'll take a look at that in a sec. Bitcoin, pretty boring. Sideways week for Bitcoin, but we'll have a quick look at that one. Crude oil, volatile, big swings during the day on crude oil, but no real direction. So we'll take a look on that as well. And FX, really good week for the euro. The euro's interesting. The euro and the pound are both interesting, but the pound has been losing ground this week. But euro, after getting hammered for weeks now, has had a really good week this week. So let's take a look at that as well. That's it. Let's jump on the platform. So what we're going to do, we're going to whiz through the major markets. Then we'll come back and have a look at any questions that you have, any different markets you want looking at. I can see that some of them coming in already, so we'll take a look at those. But let's start things off with stock markets. So S&P 500, I need to tweak that trend line a bit. So the S&P, yet again, yesterday, fresh all-time highs on the S&P. So US stocks still going up, touched 4108 yesterday. So for me, the strategy for trading stock market indices is buy the dips. That's it really. I did buy the S&P. I think it was yesterday, or was it the day before yesterday? I can't remember. I did a short-term trade on the S&P. I came out of it overnight, but it was yesterday. I think I bought in about here somewhere yesterday morning UK time, and it was against me for a bit, pushed higher, and I came out earlier today. But I would have, if I was watching and paying attention, I would have bought that. But let's see. I think for me, going into this afternoon, we only set fresh all-time highs yesterday on the S&P, and actually overnight it's moved to fresh all-times overnight before giving up gains. For me, I'd still be a buyer on dips. If we go back to perhaps the hourly chart, we can see it's been a fairly low volatility week, but any dips have brought the buyers back out. So I wouldn't be changing my stance on stock markets. To be honest, I'd want to see a break below the March lows, 3,700, which is about 10% lower than where we are now. So for me, even if we get an 8%, 9% sell-off, it still looks like a buying opportunity. Let's see. But these markets are still incredibly strong. So let's see what else we can look at. The DAX, the German market. I said this did hit all-time highs this week, but really boring. Look at that. Hit all-time highs the 5th of April. Which was this week, and then fairly boring since then. But again, the DAX, clearly it's a market that has been going up, but you can see it's been drifting since those all-time highs. Maybe it'll get a bit more interesting next week, but overall, still positive. And then the FTSE in the UK, it has been getting a bit of a move on, the FTSE. Let's bring it up. I think it's pushed ahead. I have had a FTSE trade on for a while. There we go. It's pushed ahead over the last, the last few months. We've seen a bit of a rally in the FTSE. It hasn't taken out the early January highs at 69.60. But again, with the FTSE, I'd still be a buyer on dips. I suppose we could pick up on a little trend in the FTSE off those, is it January lows? Yeah, the last day of January. We've got a little trend chugging away on the FTSE. Let's flip this over to an hourly chart. But I must admit, I don't look at the FTSE that much. I think if you want to trade indices, the S&P, for me anyway, it is a better market to trade. But clearly, lots of support on the FTSE down around 66.40, that sort of area. So in the short term for this trend that we're currently looking at. So let's see how that one pans out. And then finally on stock markets, Japan. What am I looking for? Nikkei. I do have a trade running on that that's been running for a while. It's not done much lately, the Nikkei, I don't think. There we go. It seems a bit stuck at the moment. It did move out to a multi-year high in Feb, and it's just been a bit sideways since then, the Nikkei. Lots of support down here. Nice little double touch there in March, on that earlier March low. So a nice little swing tradey thing there. But it's run out of steam a little bit, the Nikkei. But I'd expect, if we see US stock markets continue to push higher, we'll see the same from that market. Let's see what happens. But let's take a look at gold and silver. So gold was an interesting one. I did the video this week, and I said in gold, but that trend on gold is still down. If we went back to the highs from last August at 2,075, that trend is still down. So I find it I wouldn't want to get too excited about the upside in gold just yet, but I did do a video this week. I think about, where was it? I can't remember when it was. Was it here? Because I just missed, or maybe it was last week. Just missed the buy order. Maybe it was last week. And I was really looking for a bounce off these old lows, and I had an order in to buy at 16.75, and I think the market got as low as 77. So I just missed it by a couple of points, and it's bounced back about $80, $90 over the last week gold. But I do wonder, gold going into next week, you can look at what a big reversal we've seen today. So something of a bearish engulfing pattern today on the candlesticks. if we see it sell off again next week. So for me, it's still weak gold overall. Clearly that bigger trend that we always look at, which has been going for 2.5 years now, is still up, but it still looks to be under a bit of pressure, the price of gold. So maybe next week we'll see it drift back below $1,700 an ounce. So I must admit, I don't watch it much at the moment because it's all a bit just still in this correction. But if we push back next week, I'll be watching this old area down here. There you go. You can see my limit order that's been sat in there trying to buy at 1675. Just missed it that time around. But if it slips back down next week, perhaps it's interesting again down there. But a bit sort of sideways over the best part of the last month, price of gold. Silver, the market that I often refer to as the boring market and get a bit of abuse in the comments on our YouTube videos. Silver's a really funny one. There's a real almost fanatical fan club, I think, for silver out there. But if you look at it, I mean, it is pretty boring. If we look at where silver's trading now, $25 an ounce, which is okay. We've had ups and downs, but pretty much where it was in July last year. So we've been, what's that, for eight months, pretty much. A bit of excitement now and again, but pretty dull overall silver. So for me, it still looks to be a bit under pressure, perhaps still correcting a bit off those $30 highs in February. There's a lot of support running from these lows at 21.60 through to 24. So, I'd still be a buyer on dips, I think, for silver. It's just dull, a bit dull at the moment, I think, the price of silver. And if we have a look on the hourlies, I mean, is there a trade on the hourlies if you really wanted to? I suppose as a short-term trade, you might want to be a buyer now based off the hourly charts. We've got good short-term support over the last few days at 24.80. It's oversold on the RSI. The last time it was oversold was back here, where it did eventually turn around end of March. I just don't find it. It's just not really a trending market at the moment. It's all a bit sideways, as you can see. That's the chart going back to September. So it's a little bit dull, I think, the price of silver at the moment. I think there are more interesting markets out there. Bitcoin, that's been dull as well over the last couple of weeks or so. Again, the trend is still up. If we look at the trend on Bitcoin, I think I did do a trade on Bitcoin. It's by physical Bitcoin, a fraction of Bitcoin, because you can't trade it in the UK on leverage anymore due to the changes made by the regulator. So I think I did buy some on the break of 50. I think 52 I got in. It's pushed out. We saw fresh all-time highs mid-March. It's been a bit sideways since then. Clearly, the big trend on Bitcoin is still up. I think if it broke through 62.5, we'd expect again the fear of missing out, the price to get pushed a bit higher, but fairly uneventful over the last week or so, or the last couple of weeks, the price of Bitcoin. But the trend is still up on that one. I think where it's interesting, the markets we're going to look at now, euro and the pound, I think they're going to be really interesting markets to watch next week. So let's take a look. Let's start things off with the pound. Perhaps the euro is the more interesting market, but let's kick things off with the pound first of all. So the reason I think it's interesting, the last few days we've seen pound weakness. Okay, so it's gone from about 139 to trade down to 137 today. So we've seen the market drift by a couple of hundred points over the last week. But what's interesting for me is this recovery that we've seen since March last year, hit recovery highs in Feb, so about 6 weeks ago. And I still think, even though it's struggling a bit with this trend line, we've got a lot of support for the pound coming up. So what I am looking for next week for my own trading is the potential for a bounce, really, from these levels. For me, big support at 135.60 from early Feb for the pound. I think what's interesting today it's poked very briefly through the lows at the end of March. Those lows were 36.70. It's traded down to 136.70 today and bounced about 60 points. So I think the pound is an interesting one to watch next week to see if we get some sort of recovery. Clearly, we're not seeing it yet. We're still a bit weak today overall, but I think it's a really interesting market to watch next week to see if we see it start to build a base down here and run back up above 140. So I think that's really interesting. But perhaps the more interesting market is Euro US dollar. If we take this week out of the equation for now, this has been the last year in the euro against the dollar. So a great run off the lows. The lows were about 106, traded up to 123.50. And then since then, it's just been sliding. It's lost 600 points since early Jan. So 3 months, we lost 600 points in the euro against the dollar. But, these old levels, these old lows from September and November, really important support, I think, at 116. And then this week, we have seen a turnaround, ahead of this support. So what I'm wondering is, because I'm never going to be a buyer, I'm never going to catch the bottom, but I think what might be interesting going into next week, do we get a sell-off and a bit of strength? So if we get that next week, I'd be a buyer of Euro US dollar. I don't have a Euro trade on at the moment, but for me, I'd be watching that, see if it does sell off next week, how far does the sell-off go, where does the strength come in, then look to be a buyer with a stop either below 117 or 116, these old lows down here. So I think after 3 months of declines, perhaps next week we'll see, perhaps what we're seeing now is a euro recovery coming in. I don't know, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes next week. The other one that I look at quickly while I remember is sterling yen. I said that I did a trade on sterling yen because it got mentioned in a live stream. I think it was it February? And it's ended up being, I think, one of my best trades this year. So I added to it a couple of times, bought in here somewhere, 144, and it ran up. And it's great when a trade does this, when it runs up almost in a straight line, 800 points. And I think what's interesting, it did earlier this week push out again. This is the pound against the yen to its best levels since April 2018, so nearly a 3-year high. And I noticed this just before I came on. If I pick up on a trend line here, so we're seeing a bit of strength again today in sterling yen, and we're sort of above the trend that looks like that. So I think this is another one to watch next week for a trade. So I have taken most of my profits so far. I've still got a small position left in, but I think this could be an interesting one to watch next week as well. See if it's going to set up another run to 154. So for me, these lows from late March, 148.50 could be interesting, having a stop loss the other side of that. So I think sterling yen is an interesting one going into next week as well. And crude oil, let's take a look at that. Crude oil, like I say, it's been a funny couple of weeks in crude oil. But there's our trend off the March lows, or April lows, I should say, sorry. So this trend's been going for not quite a year. And you can see the swings over the last couple of weeks. We have this move here, the 23rd of March, $61 to $57, $4 swing. 5th of April, so that would have been a week ago, 61 to 57. And a fairly quiet week this week. I must admit, my bias on crude oil is still to be a buyer. The trend is up. We've got good support has emerged at 57, but not much is happening. I think if it breaks 57, because of this sideways stuff, if it breaks 57, I think we could see a bit of a sell-off. And then I'd be looking at this sort of 52 area in crude. But for me, I'm still looking for buying opportunities, to be honest, for crude oil while we're above the trend and while we're above 52. So something of a pretty quiet week for crude oil. But let's see if things get perhaps a bit more interesting next week. So for me, the immediate markets to watch next week, stock markets clearly, because they're still strong. You cannot argue, or I can't argue anyway, with the strength that stock markets, particularly the S&P 500, that we continue to see. Whenever it sells off over the last week and over the last few weeks, the buyers just step back in. So that's one to watch. Pound against the dollar, because of these old lows down here, and euro against the dollar, is it finally on the turn? The only other one I want to look at before I jump into the questions, so if you have any questions of stuff you want to look at, is cotton. I did a trade on cotton this week for myself. So this isn't one we cover on the channel because there's very rarely that much interest in agricultural commodities. But what was really interesting, I've mentioned this a bit in the past, we've looked at it in the past on these live streams, because there's been such a great trend in the price of cotton, and clearly you can trade this with us. But off the April low, so a year ago now, this trend ran and then really accelerated from December last year, going from 70 up to 95. And we've had this sell-off in cotton for just over a month now. And the reason I bought in is the same sort of thing I was talking about with euro against the US dollar to watch for next week. The market sells off, hits the trend line, bounces, sells off again, beginning of April, and I ended up buying, I think about here probably, after the day, the blue candle looks like it's holding, and with a stop loss the other side of 72, the lows down here. So I think cotton, I've just seen that someone's mentioned cotton. I think cotton is a really interesting one because that trend, so far at least, still seems to be holding. Let's see what happens. So I did personally buy in again this week. Clearly that's not financial advice, but a really interesting market to watch next week. Right, let's have a look at some of the questions that people have put in. Can you go through some agricultural commodities, e.g. cotton and sugar? Yeah, we just did cotton. Really interesting market, cotton. Sugar, I think, is another one I'm watching. Coffee's another one. I think coffee's already moved, though. Big move in sugar today. Same sort of setup, you know. I don't know, because I don't follow the fundamentals that closely. I'm not quite sure what's happened with perhaps some of the agricultural fundamentals this week, but clearly a bit of a turnaround. But sugar, same sort of setup, yeah. Absolutely great trend in sugar, again, since April last year. The price went from 0.09 to 0.19, so doubled. Sells off, and again, we're seeing quite a strong bounce today. I might have missed that in sugar. I mean, maybe next week, the setup for me in sugar will be if it sells off and we get a bounce again, but that's another one. I think that perhaps the corrections in cotton and sugar are over. Let's have a look at coffee actually, because I was watching that, but I missed it. I don't know if I'll get a second bite of the cherry next week, but I don't think it's as clean a trade as the others, but you know, big trend in coffee going back to 2019. Sold off and it's sort of gapped up really sharply this week. It's a bit of a funny market for me, cotton. I don't like it as much as the others. But quite a bit going on in the agricultural ones this week. What else have we got to have a look at? Let's see. Bitcoin, we covered Bitcoin. If you joined this late, don't worry. You can still, once we finish doing the live stuff, YouTube has the recording up. So you can go back as soon as we finish the live. You can look at the recording. Bitcoin, the trend is still up. It's just still pretty boring. We did look at that. Can we have a look at Marathon Oil? Let's have a look at that one. Marathon Oil. Here we go. So Marathon Oil, petroleum and natural gas company, blah, blah, blah. Let's have a look. I think, have we looked at this before? I can't remember. Let's take this sort of step by step. Because it's quite interesting, some of the swings in the trend. So let's just pick up on the trends. You know, I'm a big fan of looking at price action, and clearly we had this downtrend in place from 2018, broke out of it. End of last year, 2020, finally broke out of that downtrend. So for me, the trend to focus on now, and I think it's always difficult when they have, you know, something of a big move. I mean, if we go off these October lows to now, so October it was $4, and it's traded as high as 13 in March. So that is clearly a big old move. But for me, the trend is still up. So if I had to do a trade now, I'd be a buyer. So I'd be a buyer at $11 and a bit, $11.18. And the question would be, where would my stop go? The absolutely closest I'd want my stop, the other side of this low, the March the 25th low, which is at 980. And perhaps I'd be tempted to give it a bit more wiggle room and put it the other side of $9. The lows from Feb. But it's been a great performance, isn't it, since November. I think it's always scary buying these things when they move so quickly. But the trend, you know, has been up. We have seen clearly some stability, some buyers come back in over the last couple of weeks. So it looks interesting, that one, but I'd want to give it a bit of room to have a stop loss on it. Blah, blah, blah. Where are you putting your money today? Because you're right every time. I wish I was right every time. It would make life so much easier, wouldn't it? I think if I was trading today, I'd be watching the S&P this afternoon. I'll tell you what we should look at, the dollar against the Canadian dollar, because we do have that zero spread offer today. It's interesting, this, I think, because it's almost like the dollar is trying to stage a recovery, but not quite. So for me, there's the trend on dollar, Canadian dollar. And it still looks down. It's had a go of breaking out the downtrend line, hasn't it? But for me, I'd probably want to see a bit more strength before calling it a reversal, dollar, Canadian dollar. But let's see. It looks maybe it's going to drift back to 124. But we've got, like I say, zero spread on that today, so you don't have to pay the bid offer spread for trading it. Canadian dollar against the yen, someone's mentioned. Let's have a look at that. We didn't look at dollar yen, actually. Maybe we'll have a look at that as well. Canadian dollar against the yen. So so at the moment, or it has hit its best levels since October 2018. So again, for me, I'd start with the basic building blocks. Let's look at the trend in the market. It looks something like that. Clearly, the Canadian dollar has accelerated away from that trend more recently. And again, I think it's always difficult to buy these when they've moved away so much. But if you want to trade them, I mean, let's flip it over to an hourly and see what it looks like. Hang on a second. Let's just zoom that out. There we go. So we did have this great trend on the hourlies from Jan when it went from 81 up to 88. It's a big move, isn't it? Nearly a 10% move. I mean, I would tempt it. I mean, the time to trade it was a bit earlier today, I think, 8 o'clock this morning, where we had this sell-off yesterday, came back today, held above it, and we've moved a lot higher. So I probably wouldn't want to be a buyer now, famous last words. I'd wait to see what happens next week, but lots of support ahead of 86 to 86.5 for the Canadian dollar against the Japanese yen. So it still looks strong to me, but perhaps buying it up here with a stop down here, the risk reward isn't very good for me anyway. So let's see. We looked at silver. Yeah, we did silver. Okay, someone's put these uranium stocks in. Let's see if we cover them. So uranium, we don't cover that one. We don't cover that one. Paladin Energy. We don't cover that one. I'm guessing they're too small, a lot of these stocks, to be honest, to be offered by a company like us, because we tend, as with all derivatives, it tends to focus on the bigger traded stocks. And no, we don't have any of them. Denison. Nope. And Next Gen Energy. I think they're probably just too small a market cap. I did look at one last week. What was it last week we looked at? Uranium Participation, whoever that is, operates an investment holding company, invests. So that was one we looked at before, but that looks perhaps a little sideways and boring at the moment, even though the trend is still up. So unfortunately, don't cover any of those. Cocoa, let's have a look at cocoa. I think I've got a trade on cocoa at the moment. I think I got in too early. Yeah, I did. I remember now. I think I've ended up buying here in cocoa. It's not worked out that well. But the trend is still up. That's a great trend on cocoa, going back to 2017. So we're nearly 4 years into this trend. So for me, it's still pretty weak, unfortunately for me and my trade. But we're running into an area next week from 21.50 through to about 23. It'll be interesting. I think maybe let's come back to it in a week's time. But if it's going to bounce from anywhere, I'll be watching it over the next couple of weeks. And I do have a trade on with a stop on. Let's see what happens. Copper. Let's have a look at copper. Copper has been performing really well, hasn't it? It's been a bit, I think it's perked up a bit this week, copper. I did have trades on copper from last year coming into this year, and I got out of them on the way down on this sell-off. But that trend is still up in copper from the March lows. And it accelerated in Feb. It's been a little bit sideways since then, but the trend is still up. So for me, for my setup, the better trade would be something of a sell-off back towards 360 would give me a much better entry point. It just looks a little bit stuck at the moment. If you're a fan of patterns, which I'm not a fan of patterns, but if you are, I suppose some people would see some sort of triangle type thing going on at the moment. But just the volatility has just sort of died off a bit, hasn't it, really, in copper? But you can't argue with the bigger trends at the moment. So, I'd still be a buyer on dips in copper at the moment. Sugar, did we look at sugar? I think we did, didn't we? Yeah. Copper, silver, we look at that. Will it be possible to close out CFDs that have profits in the hundreds of thousands, possibly even millions, once the GME short squeeze happens? GameStop, okay. I think I've made my opinion on GameStop clear in recent videos. I think it's gone, it's over, it's finished, the GameStop thing. So I think the short squeeze was here. But yeah, of course it will. If it rallied and you made a profit, yeah, you can close it out. It applies for any market. As long as there's the liquidity in the underlying market, it shouldn't really be an issue. But yeah, I think the GameStop story has been and gone. Let's see what happens. Maybe this time next week it will be $1,500 a share. But I wouldn't bet on it. But no, there should be no problem if you've got CFDs or positions open. It shouldn't be an issue. What's your profit taking strategy? Good question. My profit taking strategy is, if I look at the sterling yen trade, I have trailing stop losses is what I do. So, for example, if I was a buyer now at 150.75, where it is now, let's say I put my stop loss 200 points away at 148.75. The market has to move 200 points in my favour, first of all, and then I'll move my stop loss to break even. Then I would trail the stop loss up as the market moved further in my favour. If it gets near a previous resistance point, I'd have my stop loss even tighter. But I don't, so I get taken out by the market going the other way. So I wouldn't just take profits. So I'm always going to be in a position where I'm giving profits back. So for example, one of my personal most profitable trades at the moment is the DAX. So I've got, clearly there's a trend in the DAX. So I've, ramped my stop loss up, or my take profit stop, I suppose you call it now, up closer to the price. So really, if it carries on pushing higher next week, I'd still be in the trade and move the stop loss up. But that's my profit taking strategy. So it's not perfect, but I don't think anything is. Nothing is perfect. But for me, because I'm a trend follower, a trailing stop order to take profits is what works for me. And I took part of the position off in the sterling yen trade because I'd had two trades on that. So one of them had much more profit than the second one, bigger position, more exposure. So I'd moved the stop up on that trade. And the other trade, which I put on, can't remember where, perhaps down here somewhere, has a stop loss about here somewhere at the moment. So I take profit stop here somewhere at the moment. So there we go. But good question. Sterling, Swiss franc. Sterling, Swiss. Never looked at this one before. Oh, wow, that's interesting, isn't it? So this has been sterling weakness this week. I suppose, I don't know what the trade would be there. I would still be tempted to be a buyer. When a trend line breaks for the first time, personally, I still look for the buying opportunity. So I think just because the trend line breaks doesn't mean the trend is necessarily over. So I would, on sterling, Swiss franc, I could still be tempted to be a buyer. Maybe that's the trade we'll do, actually. We normally try and do a trade on these things, don't we? So on sterling Swiss, it was only a week ago. It traded to its best levels since December 2019. So we were at a year plus high anyway. Let's take a look on the hourlies. So I would give it one last chance, sterling Swiss, based on this old support back here, 125.70. The market is 127.30. So let me do a trade on sterling Swiss. So what I'm going to do, so I think at the moment I'll be looking for maybe a run back up above 130. So maybe 300 plus points from here. Stop loss at 125. I don't know. Where should we go? 125.50 on a stop. So let's do that. So 125.50. Let's see what that looks like. 125.50. or maybe a bit wider, 125.30 on a stop. We normally risk 100 quid on these trades, don't we? So what's that going to be? I don't want to buy 278,000. If I buy 10,000, okay, maybe I need to buy 7,000. There we go. I'm going to buy 7,000 sterling against the Swiss franc at 127.17 with a stop at 125.30. So I'm thinking it'd be interesting one to watch next week. Do we see a bit of strength come back in and a push up from here? Let's see. Let's see what happens. Oh, do you know what I haven't done? I haven't updated the terms and conditions on my account. There we go. It's gone through. But I think that's an interesting one to watch for next week. Sterling Swiss. Sterling full stop, I think, because it has had such a difficult week, to see if it starts to build a base ahead of these old supports. Let's see what happens. ADA. I've never heard of that one. Let's have a look at that. ADA. Is that the stock? Adaptive Biotechnologies Corporation. Hang on a second. Is that the stock we're talking about? Let me know if that's the right one, and we'll come back to it if it is the right one. Cardano. No, we don't cover that one. Sorry. PayPal. We do cover that one. Let's take a look at that. Let's see. Look at that. Perfect little opportunity in March and late March. So obvious trend in PayPal from last year, from the March lows last year, traded up to 308, 309, sold off, big sell-off from 309 down to 220, and has held, and bang, 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 off we go again. So for me, the trend is up in PayPal. No market moves in a straight line forever. Nice little correction to the trend line. It's almost a textbook correction to that trend line, and off again. But it was a great, of course, with our Captain Hindsight hat on. Great trade back here last week of March, around $230 a share, when it came back but held above the old lows, also these old lows here, and it's moved about $30 higher. So it looks positive. Be looking to see if we get a run back up to those old highs above 300. Nice one. What about missile and defense industries? Yeah, we can have a look. If you know a stock, we can take a look at it. Polkadot, I don't think we cover that. Is that a cryptocurrency? Because of the FCA change, I can't trade cryptos in the UK, and I'm looking at I'm a UK resident with a UK account here, so I can't do that. What about AAA, the best performing share on the LSE over the past year? Is it a big share or is it a little share? I think it's probably too small, so we don't cover that. PayPal, we looked at PayPal. What is opinion on buy and sell at the same time? Ridiculous thing to do, in my opinion. You can do it. You can buy the pound against the dollar and sell the pound against the dollar at the same time. But it's nuts. You're paying the spread twice and you have no position because you're long and you're short. So absolutely not. For me, anyway. It's great for your broker because you pay the spread twice. So, but not for you. Not for YCC USD. No idea what that is. What YCC USD is. Boeing. Let's take a look at Boeing. We looked at these a few times, haven't we? And they were recovering, and they still are recovering, I think, by the looks of things. Nice trend. I mean, clearly had massive problems with the plane, whose name I can't remember, but the ones where there's two plane crashes, isn't there, in a new plane. But since March last year, recovering strongly. Trend is still up. Good support down at 190 to 200. Be a buyer on dips for Boeing, I think. Seems okay, doesn't it? To me, anyway. Where would you put a stop loss right now for silver if you bought at $24? Good question. Let's have a look. I think it depends on your time horizon, doesn't it? So you're saying you had bought at 24. I don't know. It depends, doesn't it? If you're buying at 24 because you think it's going to 30, that's a $6 move. It's moved $1 in your favour. For me, I'd still have my stop loss probably well below 24. If you'd bought at 24 as a trade, a short-term trade, personally, I'd have some sort of take profit stop the other side of 24.80, the lows from the 7th of April. So I think it does depend on your time horizons. Like actually, if you look at the S&P, the trade I did on the S&P the other day, yesterday, I was a buyer at 92 in here somewhere, 92, with a stop at 76 down here, which was fine for a short-term trade. If I was buying the S&P now, looking to hold it for the next few months, I'd have my stop loss a lot further away than the low of the last couple of days. So I think, where you set your stop losses, and I think we should always set stop losses because it's part of being professional, depends on your time horizon. But that's an interesting one on silver. So there we go. Virgin Galactic. Let's take a look at those. The old space stuff. Oh, but it's looking interesting, Virgin Galactic down here. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at that. So it's absolutely crazy, isn't it? But crazy stock. But so it went from $24 in Jan to 64, 62 in Feb, and now we're back at 29. I mean, from a trend point of view, we're back to the trend, aren't we? So if I had to do something with Virgin Galactic, I'd probably be a buyer down here. I don't think we'll see $60 anytime soon, famous last words, but I'd be a buyer with stops perhaps under 24. Because that trend, I mean, clearly we had a massive move away from that trend. But that trend is still chugging away, isn't it? So it's interesting down here, but I'd be a buyer on dips. Let me just put up before we look at the other stuff. Any questions after today? Obviously, go to Capital.com to open an account. The platform I'm using today is Capital.com. Go there to open an account, download our trading platform, everything else. You can start trading with as little or as much money as you want. I've got a Facebook page where I put some trading stuff on during the week. That's davidjonestrading.com. So go there. If you put that in your Google bar, it will take you there, and like it or whatever it is you do with Facebook pages. Any questions, drop me an email, david.jones@capital.com, and follow me on Twitter @JonesTheMarkets, and follow Capital.com on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Okay, that's that done. Let's go back into some of the questions. BP. I was looking at Shell this week actually for my ISA, as like an investment because of the dividend yield and everything else. So let's have a look at BP. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's been hit. I did have them in the old days when they were about $5, and they touched 2018. They touched £6 a share, £2 a share, just last year actually, October 2020. So this is interesting. I mean, I'd be a buyer. I think I'd be a buyer. The only problem is when it's gone from £2 to nearly £3. Where does your stop go? But we do have, I think, in BP a little recovery trend going on, don't we? If I was a buyer now, I'd want my stop the other side of these lows, £2.50, those sort of lows. But I would be, if I had to do anything, I'd be a buyer. I mean, clearly nothing today is financial advice, is it? But for me, looking at the trend and the recovery, I think I want to be a buyer. What do you think of Norilsk? I have never heard of them, so let's have a look. Norilsk. MMC, Norilsk Nickel, is that the one? Mining and Metallurgical Company, Norilsk Nickel. Let's have a look at that. Bit of crazy, isn't it? I'm not quite sure. Is that Norwegian kroner or something that's quoted in? Oh, rubles. It's quoted in rubles. It's a bit nuts, isn't it, in terms of what the price has been doing. Trades up to wherever that is, 28,000, and then as low as 21,000 in the same, within a month or so. I don't know. I think I often said before, some of these volatile ones, they do scare me off a bit because the volatility makes it again difficult to set stop losses. For me, it's interesting if it can break through these old highs. If we flip this over to an hourly chart, we can have a bit more of a look at this. These old highs going back to March, it's really struggled at 245, 24,500, isn't it? So, but it looks like it is trying to mount some sort of breakout. So I think for me, it'd be interesting next week. If it breaks 245, perhaps it's a buy with a stop the other side of the low before the breakout, the other side of 22,750, that sort of area. I mean, it's a pretty volatile one, isn't it? But it's interesting if it can break through next week. Norwegian Cruise Lines. Let's have a look at those. Norwegian Cruise Lines. I think, did they do, I can't remember what they did to cause that funny spike on the chart. Did they do a consolidation or something? Because they didn't. I'm guessing, but I can't quite remember, to be honest. I don't know. There's the hourly. It looks a bit boring to me, to be perfectly honest, and quite thinly traded. So I suppose I'm not quite sure what's going on with them. We think about being a buyer. Since they've done that change, we've seen 48 to 52 has been good support. They're trading at 55 at the moment, and they're weak. So perhaps if we show some strength next week, it's interesting, but it's a bit of a difficult one, I think, in that one. Are you from Nottingham? No, I'm not from Nottingham. Your outlook on GRWG. WG. Is that one? No, I don't think we covered GRWG, whoever they are. Corn. Let's have a look at corn. I do have a trade on wheat that's going nowhere. It's not available yet, corn, unfortunately. Not enough interest in that market. Let's talk about how people lose money in options and with excessive margins trying to get rich quickly. Well, it's very true. I think we talk about risk all the time. I mean, we don't trade options. We trade CFDs, and you have that risk warning at the beginning that I do. It's 71% of clients lose money. I think it's really important to understand that most people lose money trading, and I think for all sorts of reasons. But I think one of the biggest reasons, their profits are smaller than their losses. So they might be right half the time, but when they're right, they make $50, and when they lose $100. And this is how trading is for a lot of people. Which is why, I talk about running profits and trading stop losses, all that sort of stuff. And most people do not have any sort of risk management in place. People. I think you need, if you're going to trade, you need to have stop losses. If you're trading without stop losses, you're just a gambler, and you'll get stuck in a position where the market just moves against you and you don't get out of it. What else have we got? Gold and NASDAQ. Yeah, we've done that. Yeah, that'll be in the recording afterwards. How do you set the target profit for all-time high stock? Good question. I don't think you can. I think if we let's take a market. Let's go back to the S&P. I mean, how do you set a profit target when the market's moved to all-time highs? I mean, you can't, is my opinion. But what I would look at, if I was looking at, well, if I'm in the trade, what do I think the potential profit might be in the trade for my time horizon? I would look at something like the S&P over the last couple of weeks and say, well, the market's gone from 3860 to 4100. The market's moved 250 points. A 250-point move up from here isn't ridiculous with that sort of time scale. If I said it was going to double from here, that's a bit optimistic. But looking at that sort of move to be replicated would be the sort of thing I look at. But I don't think you can. It is a bit finger in the air. But I would look at things like this. This is the swing we were looking at from the March lows to where we are now. Typical swings in the S&P recently have been about 300-400 points over a few weeks. Whether that's going to continue remains to be seen. But if I had to come up with some sort of profit objective in a market that was hitting all-time highs, I'd start up looking at that. Can you say why you can't trade crypto? In the UK, if you Google FCA, which is the regulator, Financial Conduct Authority, they've outlawed trading on derivatives on crypto. So CFDs, spread betting on crypto for UK regulated people and UK regulated brokers. So that's why. So it's a regulation decision, not a capital decision. Shell. Let's take a look at Shell. We did look at BP. I think it's a similar looking chart, to be honest. Same sort of thing. So the share price hit £10 a share in October. Like BP, we've got a recovery going on. It's perhaps not as clean a one as BP. But again, I'd be looking to be a buyer of dips. I think it might be interesting, Shell, next week. I've still got on my watch list for my ISA. Lots of support from 14 to 15 on Shell. What would be interesting for me is if we get something like this, where it hits a level, rallies, hits a level again and starts moving higher. So I would still be looking to be a buyer on dips, but not quite yet, I think, in BP. Let's see what happens. Is Tesla going up anytime soon? Let's see. It's had a bounce, hasn't it? It's definitely had a bounce. I mean, it's still within that trend. that overall trend with the latest bit of the trend for Tesla off the March lows from last year, that trend line's coming in around $500, let's say, $550, that sort of area. You know, the trend is still up. So for me, if I had to do anything on Tesla, I'd be a buyer rather than a seller. It's just whether you think you might get a better chance if it sells off down towards 600 again. But the trend, I think, is still up for Tesla. Alphabet, Google, Alphabet. Let's have a look at those. Lots of US stocks today. There we go, Google. Look at that. I did notice, I looked at them the other day actually, just continuing higher. Great trend. Breakout, so sideways since Feb, and then the breakout through 2150. Looks really strong, doesn't it? I always struggle to buy breakouts, but you can't deny the strength in Google. All-time highs yesterday. If I was a buyer now, where would my stop go? I would probably want it the other side of this congestion zone. But you cannot argue with that trend in Google, can you? Over the years, some great moves in there. Looked at Tesla, looked at Google, Nasdaq. The Nasdaq has been a bit of a lagger, hasn't it? Where is it? Oh, here it is. There we go. It's interesting, the Nasdaq, because, for me, depending on where you draw the trend is still up off those lows. It just hasn't hit all-time highs, fresh all-time highs since February. But for me, again, the trend is still up. I'd still be a buyer. Would I want to buy up here? Probably not. I think what I would want to do at the moment, wait to see, do we get a sell-off back to sort of 12.8, where it was at the end of March? Or do we get a breakout through the all-time highs at about 14,000? I think I do have a trade in here. I don't know when we did the trade. I think we might have done it on a live stream back in March. There is a Nasdaq trade running that's up about 380 so far, and I moved the stop loss up a bit on that this week. But for me, I probably wouldn't do a new trade up here personally, but let's see what happens. Could you tell me in this platform I can buy shares and hold it? At the moment we are leveraged trading, so you trade CFDs, contracts for difference. So it's a leveraged way of trading. You do still get dividends, but it's slightly different to buying physical shares. So at the moment that is the case for us. What's the best catalyst news service for trading? I don't know. I never look at news, but I think Twitter. Twitter is good for breaking news on markets. But I'm very much a price-based trader rather than a news-based trader. Soybeans, good one. Do we have soybeans on here? Have I looked? I've got a trade on soybeans as well, and that's not going anywhere at the moment. We don't have that yet, soybeans. Let me show you on my third-party platform. Trade in soybeans. Here we go. It looked like it was breaking out soybeans, but it hasn't yet. So it looked like just in March it was going to break out, but it's still a bit sideways. So I've been long for a while, and it's just gone a bit boring, soybeans. So it really needs to break out, I think, that one. Please check NIO. NIO, is that the electric car company? NIO, there we go. Designs electric vehicles, there we go. It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the trend is up. It seems to be struggling a bit, but for me it would still be a buy. It's a bit of a trading buy down here with a stop the other side of $30 for me, NIO. So it's interesting that it hasn't perhaps bounced as strongly as Tesla has in the last month or so. But for me, that trend is still up. But if it starts to lose $30, I'd be worried about a much deeper sell-off from here. But for me, that trend is still up. Can we have a look at Apple? Yes, let's have a look at those. I think this is interesting, Apple, because the latest trend it's been in since March of last year is up. But it's fallen out of the trend in February. And like I said, when we looked at sterling against the Swiss franc, just because something falls out of a trend doesn't necessarily mean the trend is over. So I would still have been a buyer on Apple with my Harry Hindsight hat on. So I'd be a buyer, actually. I'd be a buyer at 131. And I'd put a stop loss the other side of these lows from early March at 116. And I'd be looking for a run back up to the highs at 145. So that's what I would say on Apple at the moment. Let's see. If it breaks 116, I think, clearly, well, not clearly, but it looks like the trend has really changed and we could see a much deeper sell-off. So it's an interesting one, Apple. But yeah, for me, even though it's falling out the trend line, it still looks positive. Copper, we've looked at copper, looked at S&P. Now, I missed out on that pending order on gold. I think we did have a quick look at it. That was the order. So to buy at 16.75, I just missed it by a couple of dollars. That one, which was a bit unfortunate. Is pound against the dollar so bearish due to vaccine news? I don't think so. I don't think it's because of the AstraZeneca vaccine. I'm not quite sure why the pound has been so weak this week. I mean, it's only knocked it back to where it was at the end of March. And personally, I'd still be watching to see if we get a bounce next week. But let's see. Niall Ferguson said the market will crash this year. What do you think? I think forecasts like that serve no purpose, to be honest. I think there are people who've been saying the market is going to crash for a number of years. And clearly at some point we will get a crash. Or not a crash, we'll get a bear market. It was said the move we had last year, the shortest bear market in history. Yeah, the S&P 500 fell 30% in about a month. So we do get, we're well overdue a proper bear market. But for me at the moment, famous last words, I don't see it happening at the moment. And I think it's, calls like that get a lot of headlines. But what are you going to do? You're just going to stay out of the market? And then what if it goes up another 20%? I don't know. Why don't you tell people to like the live stream? Oh, good point. Yeah, can you like the live stream? If you're watching the live stream, I'm watching another screen. There you go. I'll click the thumbs up button. That might help our whatever it is, algorithm. Barrick Gold. I think they've done a share split there, and we've accounted for it a bit oddly there. Let me just hang on a second. Let's have a look at the longer term. Hold on a sec. Just to put it into perspective, Barrick. Yeah, it's just been a bit drifty, hasn't it? Oh, look at that. That's terrible, actually. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, but that looks pretty horrible, doesn't it? Am I looking at the right one? I don't think I am. No. Let's look at that. It's difficult because I think a lot of these gold companies, because of what's been going on in the gold price, have been under pressure, haven't they? So it is a bit of a play on the price of gold because the movements here are sort of mimicking what we're seeing in the gold price. So I think until the price of gold gets a bit more interesting and a bit more bullish, I think a lot of these gold companies are going to flag as well. And I just think at the moment the risk is that gold could lurch down again from here and perhaps drag these gold companies down. So I can't really add much more to it than that. What do you think about WKHS? What is WKHS? Workhorse Group, is that the one? Buys and sells battery electric vehicles. I think it is a bit too volatile for me, is what I think. So it went from $42 in February to $13 today. Nice. What happened there then? I'm guessing, was it some sort of profit warning or something has happened there? I suppose, as an aggressive trade based on a recovery, it's not what I would do because I want to trade with a trend. But I think an aggressive trade could be to be a buyer with a stop loss the other side of the low after the sell-off, which is about $11.80. But I'm not quite sure what's happened there. So clearly some bad news came out. And see. Ionis Pharmaceuticals. So we've done about an hour now, so I'm going to start wrapping things up. But let's have a quick look at that one on the daily charts. Again, it's a bit nasty, isn't it? A little bit nasty. So went from $64 in January to $41 today. I mean, again, I suppose as an aggressive trade down at these lows, at the lows from last year, we're down around 40. You could maybe think about being a buyer, but I always worry about watching these ones that have really collapsed. So we'll start wrapping things up there. So what to look at next week? Like I say, for me personally, I think the euro is really interesting down here because we have seen some strength. this week. So do we get a bit of a double bottomy thing on the euro? I don't have any trades in the euro, but I really would like to be able to buy into this trend again. So I think that's a really interesting one to watch next week. The pound for similar sort of reasons. S&P, because it is, stock markets, US stock markets are still strong. A bit of a choppy day today, but you can't argue with the strength. So as usual, if you have any questions or to find out more about Capital.com, go to Capital.com to see some trading stuff from me during the week. DavidJonesTrading.com is the Facebook thing for me. If you go there, you can see, so I put some stuff during the week on that. David.Jones@Capital.com for any questions. Can't give financial advice, but happy to answer any general trading questions. @Jones the Markets on Twitter, and follow Capital.com on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. If you're watching this now, if you could subscribe and like the video, then that would be great. And that's it. 15% correction in the Nasdaq. I can't see it myself, but because the trends are still strong. So for me, we'd need to see a change in trend. I don't think 15% would be that terrible on the Nasdaq, would it? Because it's pretty volatile. Where would 15% put us? 2,000 points below here-ish, isn't it? So 11.7. So basically back to where it was in November. I mean, that'd be pretty drastic, I suppose. But for me at the moment, the trend on the Nasdaq is still up. So let's see what happens. But we'll wrap things up there. Thanks for coming along. I do enjoy doing these, looking at all these different markets that we cover. We'll do it all again next week. We'll see what happens with the markets. Yeah, good luck with your trading, and see you all again hopefully next week.